Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk about emotional regulation, something that affects all of us. And I'm going to hopefully cover some practical skills and ways to build routines as a whole family that help you feel more connected and more regulated at home. I have a little quote down here. When dealing with a difficult emotion, the goal is not to eliminate it, but to regulate it. So one thing I do believe is, you know, behavior is communication, right? It's a mindset shift. We often think our job is to stop kids from crying or being angry. And again, that goal isn't to eliminate the emotion, it's to help them regulate it. And we want to teach kids how to move through a feeling so they aren't controlled by it. It's real. Emotional regulation is really about building skills that are teaching kids to handle the storms in their lives and not trying to make them stop or making it stop rain or controlling the weather, right? Like, because that sometimes is not possible, especially when it comes to emotions, right? And so with my work at the school, I teach kids that feelings are just messages. It's okay to be mad, sad, worried, whatever it may be. But behaviors like hitting, yelling, disrupting the class, that's where it gets a little shaky, right? The feelings are fine, but the behavior that comes from them needs to be addressed a lot of the time. We teach kids that feelings are just messages. It's okay to be mad, sad, or worried, and those things are allowed. But behaviors like hitting and yelling, that's where it gets, where they're not allowed, or we try to help kids, channel it in a new way. And since kids' brains aren't fully developed, they can't always say, I'm jealous. So as an adult, a teacher, a parent, we have to kind of be a detective, right? We have to look at the behavior and ask, what is this feeling that they're trying to tell me? Do they need space? What do they need help with? How can I get them to the place where they can communicate that? Or how can I get them to the place where they understand it themselves, right? And, the harder thing too about this is, you know, the fact that caregiver regulation directly impacts our children's regulation, right? When we're dysregulated, they get more dysregulated and it escalates and escalates and escalates. So, we have to be detectives about our own emotions, right? And, this really can be the hardest slide in the deck because it really is pointing, like a mirror at like all of us as adults. And, we are our children's environment, we are the ones who sort of have to, create the guardrails for them to express themselves and to feel things, right? Like we're responsible. We have a lot of responsibility in that, right? And so, I always, I'm trying to include tips in each slide, right? So when we need to regulate, like I always try to think of a neutralizing routine, right? What are, when your child is pushing your buttons, like what are ways that you can take a pause and do something else, right? Like take a deep breath, count to 3, simple things like that we try to teach kids. Like, are we utilizing them ourselves, like walking over to the sink, squeezing it, doing things like that to help our own regulation, right? And these tiny pauses can really help us stop from reacting emotionally and gives us a chance to respond intentionally. And again, these first few slides are not just about kids or about adults, right? There's always when thinking of emotional regulation for anybody, thinking through the HALT method, right? And that's essentially looking at like, well, what else is going on? Like what's the history behind this behavior and this emotion, right? And the HALT method is asking if you or your child is hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, right? So it's letting you answer some biological needs before you try to help them emotionally regulate. Like my son, when he, sometimes I'm just like, man, he is being such a jerk right now. And, I'll kind of look at the watch and be like, oh, probably because he hasn't eaten in a few hours and his breakfast was really small, right? Or you can look and see like, okay, yeah, they didn't sleep well. Or, something made them upset. There's just these like biological things to look for when you're trying to address emotions and behavior. And the good thing about these is they're easy to solve usually, like hungry, feed them, angry, divert their attention, lonely, give them a hug, tired, some understanding from you. If there's time, give them a nap, try to get them to rest, right? These are things that you can do quickly to help intercede like certain behaviors that might be disruptive at home. Another, tip with kids that I always like to suggest is to pick your own battles. So, picking your own battles, I think a big thing with parenting and how active like newer generations of parents are in their kids' lives, reduce, kids can really push our buttons, especially our own kids, and they know how to trigger us and they know how to upset us. They learn all the ways to get attention from us that may not be the most productive. And so one of my biggest tips is usually pick your battles with your kids. Like if you picking an argument or arguing a small point about lunch, dinner, whatever it might be, is going to escalate things, then I usually say, maybe just stay silent, right? And, when kids hear no, stop, don't all day long, their nervous systems are heightened, right? And they're automatically defensive. So if you set off, if you like kick off your day in this place and your kid does too, they're going to go out through the whole day defensive of you and be picking battles with you, right? So a lot of times I say like just a lot of things you can let go and stay silent, right? So, there's the safety and sanity filter, I guess you could call it. So before correcting a behavior, ask yourself, is somebody getting hurt or something getting broken, right? And if it's no, then consider letting it go or ignoring minor annoyances to prevent like your own energy from getting depleted, so you can save your energy for moments that matter, and you're not setting your kid up with this defensive posture towards you or their whole day. Whenever I talk about emotional regulation, communication, anything where you're having to connect with a child, I use the term connect and redirect. I think when a child's melting down, their thinking brain is offline. That's proven by science. So you can't teach them a lesson when they're screaming or yelling at you. They're not going to understand the discipline behind that. They're not going to understand anything you say to them, really. And so really you have to connect with them before you can redirect what they're doing. So you got to give them a hug. You got to sometimes validate their feelings when, maybe you don't want to, right? Like as the adult, you have the burden of responsibility to do those things to teach them a better way to express that emotion in the future, right? But it does require you being able to somehow connect with them, make them feel heard, get their defenses to drop. And then that's when you can bring in the discipline and things like that. Like this example here, stop crying, pick up blocks now, or, clean up your noodles, whatever the example is. The I see you're angry type statement comes up a lot. So you can describe their feeling and then come up with a regulation tool to try to help them or divert them from what's frustrating them. And then, directing after that's over about like the proper way to approach like the situation. This goes back to the first tip about your own caregiver regulation. It's really modeling and narrating your own regulation. I touched on this in my last talk just a little bit, but being able to express yourself and teach them the ways that you're regulating is key because, like you've heard probably a million times on Instagram or wherever you get parenting information, it's really what you do a lot of the times that matters more to kids than what you're saying, right? So like if they're seeing you regulate and you're adding that layer of language on top of it to narrate something, then, it's hitting them twice, right? They're seeing you regulate yourself, you're framing it as that, and they're going to learn from that, right? So like the big the big thing is like, being able to tap out or get out of there when your kids are driving you crazy. Sometimes deep breaths aren't enough. So, narrating that you need a break is very important, right? Just tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? You're like, I'm feeling frustrated right now, so I'm going to go somewhere else, or I need a minute to breathe and be calm. I've done this, multiple times with both of my kids, where like I can tell walking into the room and seeing what they're doing is pissing me off. So then I say, okay, I need a minute. I'm going to go somewhere else, and then I walk away to a different area of the house for a little bit until I can approach them. And this dovetails well with how we talk with kids as well. So, there's this concept of the do instruction that's a little bit better than the don't for their brains. There's this whole frame of um, a thought called rational frame theory. So if you frame things in don'ts all the time, it just escalates the do's behind it. So it escalates that rebellious part of us that will just keep doing it. So offering them something that is a do that's different than what they're doing is sometimes more effective than just saying don't do that or stop doing this. Like don't yell. It's, you use a quiet voice, right? Stop climbing. Please keep your feet on the floor. Or, 4 on the floor, right? With when you're leaning back in a chair, things like that, right? It gives them a clear target with positive actions rather than a struggle, right? It's like they are they have this impulse and they need something to do instead of that, right? And telling them to stop just makes them think more and more about what they're doing and what they want to do rather than actually having them stop, right? And the word stop, and I mean, you have to use them sometimes, and it's hard not to, but they can also like make kids, feel scared and like they like are complying out of fear rather than, buy in as well. This is a newer one that I found some data on that I thought was really interesting. And it makes sense, like when you think of your kids and trying to talk with your children. There's this concept of a 5-second rule when things fall on the ground or whatever. That's silly, but the same thing can be for comprehension with kids. And especially if your kid is neurodivergent, I would say this could be a 10-second rule, right? I myself sometimes need the 10-second, processing time to understand what people are saying to me, right? And children process sounds slower than we do, especially when they're emotional. And so if we repeat ourselves over and over again, put your shoes on. Hey, you need to get your shoes on. We actually flood them rather than help them in any like productive way, right? So the strategy is, asking and counting, right? You get down to their eye level and then you give them the instruction once. And then in your head, you count 5 seconds. And if they don't do it, then you repeat yourself or try to have them make eye contact if they're comfortable with that, right? And then you don't say it again, right? It really prevents escalating them emotionally in the moment so they can stay regulated when you're trying to get something out of them, right? And I would also say like you would be surprised like how much this works because like around the 3 and 4 second mark of that count, like a lot of times they're like, you'll see it in their face, like, oh, okay, I need to go do this. Or they'll turn around and just do whatever you're asking. But you do see that like delay that you never get them. And if you never give them the chance to like process that and you just repeat it over and over again, they won't get there. And so, this is all, everything in here is child dependent, family dependent, culture dependent, all of that. So, but I always think that, with this age group, I mean, and there are multiple ages listening to this, but like younger kids, especially, their rational brains aren't developed. I would say 7 and below, then you should use visual tools, right? They're, in the school and classroom, in my office, there's visuals for everything, visuals for places, feelings, things that they want, right? Like there are just ways that children communicate with you that are showing you things, right? And I think that for kids, this is really important and helps build an environment where they can stay regulated, where they don't have to constantly rely on the cognitive load of coming up with words for things. This can help them reduce that, right? So, so when it comes to regulation, when kids are really upset, words will be overwhelming. So stop asking, what do you want? Right. And start having them show you if you have visual tools of things that typically upset them or things that they want, they can point rather than rely on the words. Right. So you use visuals to help them communicate and start building a story and narrating it back to them. So then they get the verbal skills from you as you're narrating it to, next time or the next 10 times, sometimes it's slow. They can name it rather than need the nonverbal communication. But this is a great entry in teaching kids how to, one, regulate and not rely on language to constantly get your help. And yeah, as far as like a practical tool, like there are regulation menus as, therapists, especially therapists who work with highly sensitive kids, they will create these visuals like for families to take home, but you can do them with your kids. Like you can ask them like, hey, when you're feeling this way, like, what do you usually need? This is when they're like regulated and able to speak, right? I need headphones or I need a hug or I need a drink of water, right? So like you can create that menu for them. So when you see them in a nonverbal place, you bring that over to them and show it to them and say like, hey, like, what do you need right now? So now I'll go over some other practical skills to teach. These are simple sensory movement strategies for home. Tools 1 and 2, are really about calm and safety at belly breathing, however you want to frame the breathing exercise, something that gives them that makes it a game for kids really helps them learn how to breathe and take deep breaths. And I know sometimes this stuff is like, oh, of course, right? But kids do, they do respond well to like blow out the candle or you make a box where you're like, whatever game you teach them, with breathing, you can interrupt like big emotions and get them to do that if they've had fun with it in the past, right? And so like balloon belly is really fun where you're like, touch your belly and you fill up your belly like a balloon and then blow it out. Just simple games like that can help them and reset them in those moments, right? And yeah, at home, like having some place where they feel is safe, like another room if it's possible, something in their room, a place in the common room. Everybody's house is different and, sometimes space is limited. It's some place that they know is where they can go if they need like a low stimulus spot where there's things that are comfortable to them. And again, this teaches kids how to ask for space and it prevents escalation, right? So if they're thinking I'm getting heightened right now, I need to go over here, then a lot of times they can just do it by themselves after a while and don't need to be reminded. So they're taking ownership of their own regulation. These are two of the things that I rely on the most, especially when people have a hard time, kind of regulating after recess or sitting down for class, right? Is, busy hands, calm body, right? So when I'm teaching in classes and I can tell somebody's struggling with this, I'll go hand them something. I'll like walk over to the sensory box in the classroom and hand them a stress ball or a stuffy and ask them to take care of it for me until I'm done, right? Give them a little job along with it. And, this helps divert physical impulses and channels them into something in their hands, right? And then, yeah, like full body resets, like if there's a lot of explosive energy, giving them very physical tasks to do. I'll take like some of the kids outside and do push-ups with them. Or like we have like racing contests, just using this explosive physical energy to, help them regulate their body and reset like their physiology, right? And it can really, if they're feeling overwhelmed and anxious, it does that quote, like runner's high can be stimulated by giving them this like heavy work to do, right? And that anxiety or stress or not knowing what to do with their energy can be channeled into something like that. So like if you see that at home, like you can even have them push something heavy, right? Or stomp around the house, go out, really go outside and run. But a lot of times it takes you doing it with them. So you need to like, again, make it fun and make it a partnership usually. So another thing, um, other things that are really important is, teaching kids like body control and being able to regulate their environment. So, when the, there's a big conversation about impulse control and willpower and things like that, right? Where, it's like, do we have the willpower to control our impulses? And some people say no, some people yet say yes. For kids, it doesn't really matter, right? They're just not going to control the impulses. So, they can debate that as an adult. But as a child, the answer is really no. So you really are teaching them, you want to teach them, the muscles of like knowing how to stop when they need to, right? Or knowing how to slow down when they need to, right? And so stop and go is a fun game. Like you can do that with like red light, green light, yellow light. One thing I do is, whenever I have a small group in my office or even just an individual, I'll say, I'm going to play music on my phone, but when you hear it pause, so you have to kind of pay attention while you're playing with other things, then you have to freeze, right? And then when I play it again, you can unfreeze, And so I put on like, I usually use Harry Potter music because it's like magical sounding and call it the magic music. And we'll play it and then, they'll have to listen for it and then I'll stop it and then they'll have to pause it. And that's teaching them, it teaches their brain how to inhibit impulses, right? Because they're in the middle of doing other things and they have to pay attention to an external stimulus and know when to stop, right? And these are great things to do while they're regulated and builds that muscle for them when they're dysregulated, right? Touch on auditory processing a few times here. And I mean, I think it's important to have tools, at home, at school, and at school for kids who struggle with noises and loud things, yelling, surprising things, right? And just giving them the ability to ask for headphones or earmuffs and a quiet space, right? That goes back to that like trusted space and kind of intersects with it, right? So because auditory overstimulation can trigger kids' fight or flight, right? There's a whole like strain of therapy called Safe and Sound that uses headphones and different frequencies of music to help train kids' fight or flight mechanisms or their limbic system. Yeah, next tools. The first one is name it to tame it. That is always powerful. When you can teach your kids to label their feelings through like how they're looking or how they are expressing themselves is the name it to tame it method. Next few tools kind of focused on connection and how we communicate or hold each other. Name it to tame it really is a powerful one. Obviously using simple words for kids this age. I think also being able to, say what you're seeing out of the kid, the behavior or how they're expressing themselves. Like, I see your eyebrows are crunched. You must be frustrated. You must be mad. You must be grumpy. You must be sad, right? Using those small words to describe the feeling. It really can move them from, the activity of the emotional brain to like hopefully trigger like them to think a little bit. So giving them these labels right now, you might not see them use the labels because they're still developing language, but down the road, they will start surprising you and saying things that you're just like, where did you learn that from? Right. But using it right now at an ECE age, will net a lot of benefits later. And then always like the power of hugs, right? This is scientifically proven, like deep pressure of a hug with a trusted adult, parent, loved one, whatever it may be, releases oxytocin and calms your body down, almost like a miracle. So like children who are, disconnected from you, maybe even refusing to speak to you, turned away from you, offering a hug can really change that dynamic, right? And one of my favorites, especially, in my past working with neurodivergent kids, is just change the subject, right? Like, let's say your kid is in a moment, let's say your kid is having a moment where they cannot escape their feelings about something. They don't want to leave. They're having a tantrum. They're stuck somewhere. They're avoiding going somewhere. They are hiding from you under something, like really being able to get them out of that loop through distraction, right? So just knowing your kids is good in this point. Like, I mean, every in the school, every kid is into either K-pop Demon Hunters or Pokemon. So I know a lot about that from my own kids, and I will use those to help the kids at school kind of reset like what they're like a loop or a pattern that I can't get them out of other ways, right? So it's like, well, let's look at some pictures of Pokemon. Do you want to go print some K-pop Demon Hunter coloring sheets with me? Doing things like that will hopefully distract them or force their brain to pivot and get out of that space where they're feeling so dysregulated, right? And then you can use some of the other strategies to help continue the regulation, but changing the subject from whatever they're upset about, I think is a adequate way to go about it if you've run out of options. And so, the I think the most important step in all of it, in all of dysregulation or conflict with kids or times that they're upset at home, is being able to close the loop and rupture and repair. Finally, the most important tool is repair. We all mess up. We all get in fights with our kids. We all yell at them. I mean, to varying degrees. They yell, back, right? Like we all get into those places where we feel like maybe we've made a mistake or they've made a mistake. Um, and it's really important to come back to that situation, right? The magic of repair is really saying like, hey, I made a mistake and I'm sorry, and that teaches them someday maybe they'll be able to do that to you. Maybe not until they're an adult, who knows? But they, will learn from that repair from you, right? And it's really about coming back when things are calmed, saying, I'm sorry, I lost my cool or lost my temper, however you describe it. Um, you know, Next time, this is what I hope to do. This is what I want to do differently next time. And that helps them show that relationships are stronger than like the upsetting conversations we can have as people in relationships, right? It helps them build resilience, and that a relationship can be stronger than just the conflict within it, right? Especially the parental relationship. And it teaches them how to do this in their future relationships as well, and have more of a flexible understanding of how humans interact, and not get so bogged down in tit for tats. Blah, 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 blah. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. I hope that you can put some of these tools to use and you find this valuable and it's helpful in some way to you. If you have questions, there's my email address. And yeah, thank you.